Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I am Anara Tabashaliva, along with co-host Dr. Victor Fett, Dr. Katerina Shrey, and our program producer, Professor Larry Sherray. We host a weekly discussion panel on Russia's war on Ukraine with guests from Ukraine, military experts, medical personnel, academics, artists, literary figures, and relief workers. Our panel is recorded and circulated nationally and internationally. We appreciate your comments and feedback. Special thanks to Marshall University Libraries and MUIT for making this weekly event possible. If you are joining us live on Teams, please feel free to use the chat to post any question for our guest. A quick greetings to our viewers in Ukraine from Professor Katerina Shrey.
Вітаємо наших слухачів в Україні з глибоким поклоном. Ми вдячні, що ви в безпеці після жахливих нападів цього тижня. Ми далі свідки вашого страшного терпіння і також вашої великої сили. Дякую вам за вашу участь в нашій тижневій програмі.
Thank you, Katerina. Today's guest will be introduced by Professor Victor Fett.
Thank you, Nara. Before I introduce our special guest for today, I want to share my screen and show a few images which were sent to us from Kyiv regarding yesterday's attack, which is believed to be the largest Russian attack on Kyiv and Ukraine, over 1,234 days of war. I'm sharing my screen right now, and this is the map of attacks from drones, Shahed drones, and missiles from outside on the territory of Ukraine and Kyiv in the middle. And some images which speak for themselves, collected and sent to us by our contributor, Dr. Sergei Masyakin, director of the Institute of Botany of Ukrainian Academy of Science. Kyiv on July 10th, yesterday. And with this, I pass the microphone to our today's guest, very special person, Sergeant Matthew Sampson, an American who has been in Ukraine for over 700 days. Please, Matthew, microphone is yours.
Thank you very much. And thank you all for everything you do to set up this platform and to continue doing this for over 170 times. That is fantastic and awesome. And I really appreciate that. So a little bit about myself. I'm Matthew Sampson. I just turned 38 and I'm right at the 20-year mark now of my service officially to others and to governments. I started my time in the US military in 2005. Right after graduating high school. I was 18 for 1 week. I'm coming up on that anniversary here next week, actually. Spent 5 years active duty from 2005 to 2010. Spent time in the infantry, 3rd Battalion, 4th Marines in California. I spent time in Washington State at a nuclear submarine base. I was got to be a part of our nuclear program there. And while I was stationed in California, I spent almost all my time there in the Scout Sniper Platoon and did combat deployments to both Iraq and Afghanistan. And between those two deployments, I got to go to Scout Sniper School out in Hawaii. Interesting fun fact, sometime after graduating there, we shut that school down. We had 4 of them at the time, so we shut that down to having 3. And now the Marine Corps no longer has Marine Scout Snipers. They got rid of their tanks some years ago, and sometime in the last maybe 2 years, they no longer have the occupational specialty of Marine Scout Sniper. So it's a job that does not exist as it once did in the past. After my 5 years active duty in the Marine Corps, I spent over 2,000 days back in Iraq as a security contractor, doing security primarily in Baghdad, Iraq, for our U.S. embassy there. It's the largest and most fortified embassy in the world. And a little bit of time in southern Iraq in the province of Basra. We had a U.S. consulate there, which was also the largest consulate in the world. And that was quite an experience for me. We would have summers where it would be about 145 degrees in the summertime Fahrenheit, which is approximately 63 or 65 degrees Celsius. Sometimes with very little humidity, sometimes with almost 100% humidity, depending on which part of the country and the weather patterns of that summer. It was very interesting. And from there, spent a little bit of time working directly for the US government. Then I got to be a program manager of a training range out in the state of New Mexico, very similar to going to a rifle range to shoot rifles or pistols, but it was bigger and for the Air Force to drop bombs. So it was 71,000 square acres. I had a staff of 20 folks in a few different areas for a total of 80. And while I was there, I got to learn a lot of everything that goes into helping train the US military and aspects of the military. So we did stuff with the Air Force, we did stuff with a lot of different US forces, and international forces would come out there to do training, especially on the ground. We had some ground ranges that they're able to use, like basic pistol ranges, rifle ranges, driving ranges to do actual driving vehicle training, stuff like that. Then, interesting coincidence, the day that I left that job is the same day that there was a full-scale invasion on Ukraine in 2022 in February. And that was something that I honestly didn't know what Ukraine was. I know a decent amount of World War II. I know quite a bit about the Cold War. I'm fascinated by what happened with Chernobyl. I had no idea Chernobyl was in Ukraine until I physically got there sometime later. So when that took place, I had no idea what the word Ukraine was, anything about the country, the culture, nothing at all. But what I saw was what was being shown on international news around the world of the invasion. And again, I didn't really know anything about Ukraine, but I've known Russia long enough to know the evil that they're known for doing when they invade a country. Stuff that it involves mass graves and mass executions of men, women, and children that are not military targets whatsoever. That stuff like that can be considered fairly normal for the Russian military. And I got to see a small part of that when I was in Afghanistan during the winter of 2009 and going into 2010. I got to interact with some Afghani locals that showed myself and other Marines that were there with me evidence, photos and stuff like that of mass graves and executions of what the Red Army did when they were occupying Afghanistan for all those years during the Cold War. So when this invasion happened in 2022, it was something that I've always had a passion for helping and serving others. And I just felt like I could not just sit back and do nothing, especially with the background and experience that I have. So I spent some time doing some research. I decided it would not be very intelligent for me to just jump on a plane and decide to go face what was known to be the second strongest military in the world without doing some kind of research and better understand what that all entails, and if it's something that I actually should commit to to the extent of actually physically going there. So after I did that for a couple of months, I finally did it. I had a lot of support from family at the time and friends. They were not very excited for the choice that I was making, but they were supporting me as an individual, whether I was their family member or their friend. So it was May of 2022 that I got into Poland and spent a couple days there before I found what train would be the proper train to get to the border closer to Ukraine. I could not find anyone there that was willing to help me. I called the US Embassy there and they refused to give me any direction whatsoever. And then it was 27 May 2022 that I walked across the border into Ukraine, not sure exactly what I was doing, just knowing that I wanted to go east and do whatever I could to help and support the cause and help protect the Ukrainian people in whatever way I possibly could. Once I interacted with the International Legion there, I was quickly transferred over to the GUR side of it, which is their military intelligence. It's a Directorate of Intelligence of Ukraine, very similar to the American CIA. And those two agencies have a good working relationship together and have for quite some time. So I started working with them. They asked me to be a commander of a new team and help build and form a new team. I politely declined multiple times, as I was not looking for additional responsibility of others. I really just wanted to do my job and see if I make it home. And we continued that conversation. And after multiple requests, I agreed to take on this role. So just about the entire time I was in Ukraine during that period, I was a commander of a special operations team at the front lines under the GUR and working with Ukrainian commanders and other foreigners and other Americans that would at times take the commander role as well. And that's how it worked over there, that there was, we didn't really use rank. Rank didn't really exist. It's really just what does the mission need and where is the respect. So sometimes someone like myself would be the primary sniper for the mission. Sometimes I'd be auxiliary medical assistance for the mission because I have a medical background as well for combat medicine, or sometimes, or a lot of times I was one of, or the commander for the ground forces for the operations at the front. While I was at the front lines, I spent time in regions of Mykolaiv, Zaporizhia, Kharkiv, and Donetsk. Almost all of 2023 I spent in Bakhmut, either inside Bakhmut or outside trying to get back in once Ukrainian forces lost the city. And I spent a total of 635 days there until I decided that it was time for me to go back to the US and take some time off. And that was February of 2024 was when I went back to the US. Because for multiple reasons, like I said, I needed some time off for myself. Being in a war zone that long without any other break is very taxing, and my mother was not doing very well health-wise. I also knew that I had a unique experience as being what I still believe as the longest serving US citizen for consecutive days doing combat operations in Ukraine, for someone that's never lived in that country prior to this full-scale invasion. And I wanted to share my experience because I quickly understood that people back in the United States, the voters and lawmakers, really have no firsthand knowledge of what was actually going on there. So I was just really going with the flow almost of doing as much networking as I could. And that led to me being invited formally by the American Coalition for Ukraine for the 4th Ukraine Action Summit in April 2024 to go to Washington, D.C. and talk to Congress. And I got to be one of 500 people there representing 47 states. I was representing for myself New Mexico, which is where I was registered at the time, and also Arizona, working with the Arizona delegation, which was approximately 12 to 15 people. And got to have an amazing experience. And one of the big issues of advocacy during that time was the $60 billion aid package for Ukraine. And this was an aid package that was becoming more important by the day, as the previous aid package, I believe, was approximately 400 days before that. So it was getting more and more critical that Ukraine needs more aid. And there was a lot of fantastic people there, Ukrainian Americans, Americans that just are passionate about the cause, and Ukrainian refugees. So, and some other foreigners as well, just very passionate about having their voice heard by their elected officials. My part of it was just to be the subject matter expert of the frontline operations from the American warfighter perspective. And all the offices that I went into had never interacted with someone that had spent 600 days doing combat operations as an American veteran, 2 previous wars out there on the front lines of Ukraine. So it was huge. And it was awesome for me to see that when this Action Summit started, the $60 billion aid package was not yet scheduled to be voted on. By the time it was over, it was scheduled to be voted on. And in less than a week, I believe, if I remember correctly, it was on the president's desk for signature, that it had had passed the House and the Senate and was ready to be signed into law, so we could start moving weapons and equipment and ammunition and needed supplies to the front lines of Ukraine. It was shortly after that I decided I was going to make Scottsdale, Arizona, my future home. It took me almost a year to do that. I'm still brand new here. I'm still unpacking. I've been here just for a few months now, and it's been quite a journey. I got to be part of the recent Ukraine Action Summit this last April 2025. This time there was over 600 people representing all 50 states and Puerto Rico. And again, I was there to be the subject matter expert of the frontline situation from the American warfighter perspective. And I spent a little bit of time back at the front lines again before going to that summit. So that way I would just have accurate and updated information from battlefield commanders I know and trust, and fellow Americans that, again, I know and trust there, and being able to see some of it for myself firsthand. And that leads me to where I am now. And so I'm very excited to hear what questions there might be and continue this discussion and share any part of the experience of whatever you folks might have for me. So please don't be shy, don't hold back, and ask me anything you like.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Sergeant Sampson, for your service and for a wonderful presentation. And here I give microphone to our friend Pastor John Yeager of Huntington, West Virginia, who actually brought Sergeant Sampson here under our partner organization, Sunflower Seeds Tri-State Help for Ukraine. John, please.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, he was here on June 28th, but we spent several wonderful days with him at our house, and good to see you, Matt. One of the things that during our discussions while you were here that got my attention was the international nature of a lot of the fighters there. Also, for everybody, we are going to ultimately edit the video of the expert panel that we had on June 28th, so that'll be available as well, Victor, down the road. But could you speak to that aspect a bit, Matthew, about your interaction with internationals? Thank you.
Absolutely. Fantastic question. And I really appreciate the time that we got to have together in West Virginia a couple of weeks ago. That was fantastic. And I really appreciate the hospitality for you and your family. So for me, it was definitely a new experience being part of the International Legion. About half of the unit and the team was Ukrainian and the other half was foreign. Out of foreigners, it was mostly Americans, but I had probably at least 20 different nationalities come and go off my team from, I think, every continent except for Antarctica. So just to name off a few off the top of my head, I had people from the US, Mexico, Colombia, Canada, Chile, Argentina, New Zealand, Australia. One guy that was Vietnamese. We had Russians. We had Ukrainians, Spanish, German, Italians, British, Lithuanians, Polish. It was huge. Different parts of the country of Africa, or the continent of Africa as well. It was all over the place to have this. So I was very thankful that my native language is English, and English and freedom are the only two languages that I speak and understand, really. So foreign languages is not a strength of mine at all. I spent a long time in Iraq, thousands of days, and I really didn't pick up on any Arabic. So very thankful that with that massive international community that was within the unit, that English was the most common language at the front lines. And so that's what we used. So that was very fortunate. And it was something that at times came to our benefit. For example, I was part of an operation that led to us taking Russian soldiers as prisoners, and we took a handful of them. And I believe that some of us speaking very clear American English helped with them being willing to surrender before the fighting continued, and there was more casualties that day. So that was something that is definitely a benefit. We also know that on average, most Russians don't understand English, Russians that are fighting on the front line for Russia. So in the instance that they do intercept our radio communications or hear us verbally talking without the radios, then we're pretty confident that they'll know that we are Americans or assume that we're Americans, but will not be able to understand what we're saying. Compared to Ukrainians, we know that the Ukrainians can generally understand at least the concept of what the Russians are saying, and vice versa, that the Russians can usually understand at least the concept of what the Ukrainians are saying. So that was something that was a benefit. It was definitely a hindrance at times when we're trying to do very quick communication amongst ourselves, that some of the folks on the team and on the unit, their English is no so good. Well, regardless of what country they came from. For some of them, English might be their fourth or fifth language that they are in the process of learning. So, I'm fascinated that they're able to learn all these different languages. But sometimes there was a lot of just pointing and playing charades just on the battlefield. It's just the battlefield version of charades.
Katerina, please.
Yeah, so a
Thank
quick follow-up to this. This is amazing first of all, you're amazing to me that you go without, as far as I can tell, you're not Ukrainian, your parents aren't Ukrainian, you're just a guy doing what he thinks is right, which is, thank you. I actually, I'm not prepared for this. When you talk about people coming from all the continents, are these like Ukrainian Americans, people who are like, I'm Ukrainian. I was born here in the United States. My parents are immigrants. I grew up speaking Ukrainian. We have Ukrainian schools, Ukrainian churches, very much a Ukrainian community, as with many other cultures in the United States. That's one of the beautiful things about the United States. You can come here, be fully American, and still, enjoy the rich heritage you come with. So were these people like you, just men doing the right thing, men and women, I guess, doing the right thing, or were they like I know some people who've gone over who are like me. They grew up here, they've heard about Ukraine all their lives, and so it kind of, I don't know. I don't say it's not expected, but it's also not unexpected. Were any of these people of Ukrainian heritage?
Great question. Fantastic. So I can't speak for all of them, but I know that I interviewed a good number of them myself as they were getting ready to possibly join my team as I was fulfilling the commander role, that I would help to interview them and vet them a little bit and see, do we want this person to join our team, or do they need to go somewhere else? Or are they just here for the wrong reasons? So it would usually be a pretty quick interview, a little bit about their experience, but it would definitely be a significant focus of the question, why are you here? So if the answer is, I'm here to kill Russians, then we would politely say, that's great, but you're not going to be doing that with us. That's not what we're here for. That is a side effect of our work that we do from time to time, but that is not the primary focus. So I would say that at least 80% were folks that had no direct connection to the country of Ukraine. And to clarify for myself, I have zero connection to that country. I have zero connection to that culture, the people, the nation, any of that. Like I said, if it was 4 years ago and you said the word Ukraine to me, I honestly would have no idea what you're talking about. So I don't speak the language, nor do I really want to. Again, I'm not really good at that stuff anyway. But yeah, my father was Italian. My mother was a bunch of other stuff. So no connection really to Ukraine. But yeah, I'd say about 80% were there because they felt similar, that they know that Russia does some pretty evil stuff, and they want to do whatever they possibly could with us at the front to help protect as many Ukrainian men, women, and children as they could.
I'm so overwhelmed and humbled by that. How did how big was the unit, and how did y'all keep morale up? I mean, this has to be hard, far from home in horrible circumstances. How did morale, what kept you all going?
That's something that within the community that does combat stuff, whether it's direct combat operations or whether it's just doing support, logistics, stuff like that, but for combat forces, it's a little bit of a different breed, just like law enforcement here in the United States. The folks that decide to volunteer to go and put on a uniform and a badge every day, they're just a little bit different than the rest of us. And for the most part, that's a good positive, as long as they can handle the work life and how to allow that to interact with their civilian life at home and try to have that separation as needed for folks that do law enforcement and military work. So for that, the morale was us looking at just one another, that when we're out there in the moment, we're not really fighting for Ukraine, we're fighting for each other and doing everything that we can, whether it's 4 of us out there on the mission or 20 of us out there on a mission, whatever the numbers are for that specific mission for that day. Our primary goal in that moment is to get all of us home in hopefully one piece, or in as many pieces as possible. Here I have with me shrapnel that I brought back from the front lines, and so I got some of my buddies that were killed over there, and others that were injured with stuff like this. So that they don't always come home, but in the moment, our morale is focused around each other and what we got to do for each other to make sure we all get home each and every day.
Well, so that brings me to a question I'm almost afraid to ask. When this horrible war first started, I believe Putin said that anybody coming in to fight would not be treated as a prisoner of war, right? Whereas you would be treated differently from Ukrainian soldiers. Is that true? Is that right? Am I remembering that correctly? I mean, it just implies the risk you took was far greater than. It's kind of slowly dawning on me the magnitude of the risk you took to fight on behalf of those who can't defend themselves. I think that's true, right? He did say that you guys would be treated far worse. The Geneva Convention would not extend to you, I believe, is what he said.
So correct. When I was over there, to the best of my knowledge, there's no active duty U.S. combat troops in Ukraine fighting the Russians at the front lines. That would be a military on military force, the U.S. against Russia, and a world war problem. So myself and all the other American veterans that are out there, we have no direct connection to the U.S. military. So therefore, yeah, it's my understanding that any Geneva stuff wouldn't apply to us. Not that we would trust the Russians to abide by any of that. Anyway, that part for us, we're able to just see the reality of the frontline situation and know that whatever the rules are on a piece of paper somewhere don't really apply when it comes to the Russians, unfortunately. You could see that a little bit when you see prisoner exchanges happen. Russian POWs that are being released back into Russia are usually, at a minimum, they're well fed. Some of them have gained some weight. But you could see that they're generally in pretty good spirits because we go out of our way to treat them pretty well. Whereas when you see the Ukrainian POWs getting off the Russian bus to be returned back to Ukraine, they're a lot of them are literally starving to death. So we know just from there that Russia isn't interested in whatever international laws might be when it comes to warfare. For Americans, yes, I do fully concur that I would say that the Americans are more heavily targeted than any other nationality out there on the front lines, and rightfully so. Russia and America has seen each other as each other's number one enemies since really the end of World War II. So that's just been part of our culture. That's how I learned about Russia in the early '90s as a very young person. I started off in the San Francisco area of California, and we did blackout drills. We did drills of go and hide under your desk at school because the nuclear missiles might be coming in from Russia. So it wasn't any other country. It was always Russia. So they were taught probably similar stuff that we want to kill them or whatever. So we know that there's higher risk for Americans. For me and my team, we had a strict understanding that none of us would be taken prisoner alive. And that was something I can go more in depth into that if you like. But that was something that we decided before we ever went out to the front lines. Now, I do know an American gentleman, a guy named Alex, that was taken prisoner. I never worked with him. I never saw him in the country of Ukraine. I only met him, I believe, this year, 2025. So after everything had happened, but I believe it's 2022, I think, or maybe early 23. Him and another was captured and held captive for, I believe he said 105 days before the countries worked things out to exchange them back over to the Ukrainian side. And from what he has described, and I've only talked to him a little bit, is exactly what the stereotype would be of anything that we've seen in movies or TV shows that involve Russians taking someone prisoner. It involved a lot of car batteries, a lot of torturous
Jesus.
stuff.
Oh my God. Oh my God.
Trying to force him to say that he worked for the CIA, and to be frank, I have no idea who he's worked for in his past. I don't know anything about his background. So, but trying to force him to say a specific narrative. This was also a risk that myself and my colleagues faced in places like Iraq and Afghanistan, that we had to be prepared that it was one thing that's very different. Iraq and Afghanistan very different than the war in Ukraine, and I don't see one as being more challenging than the other. They're just very, very different types of warfare there. Where we know an American walking around in Iraq or Afghanistan, there's a high risk of being kidnapped, thrown into an orange jumpsuit, and then a camera being put in front of you, and you're going to be told to say some stuff before your head's removed from your body while you're still alive. So that's something that from the American side, we're kind of used to that already. If for those of us that have spent any time in Iraq or Afghanistan. So for him, it was horrible, the experience that he went through, and I'm proud to know this guy and that he survived. And I'm looking forward to hearing more of his story. And I know he's doing advocacy work in within the political realm, and talking to lawmakers more about his experience. So that's fantastic that he's using the experience for good, and not allowing it to destroy his life like it was doing when he was under Russian captivity. But again, for us, me and my team, we fully understood that we would do whatever necessary to make sure that none of us would be taken prisoner alive. And we understood that the bigger picture was very, very important, that an American being held by Russia, it's a problem for Ukraine. It's a problem for the United States, even though we're not US property. We're not in the US military. It's a problem for the United States, that then they got to have uncomfortable conversations with Russia. It's a huge bargaining chip for Russia. So it's something that we understood that's part of why we're going there, is to help the problem, not make the problem worse. So for us, it was just a strict thing. None of us are going to be taken alive.
Wow. I'm beginning to appreciate the word heroism more. While you were there, did you interact with any of the local people? Did they see you? Did they express appreciation? Like what was the amount of contact? Did you have any contact with Ukrainians, just who knew what you were there for and what you were doing for them? And how did that go?
Absolutely. And there was a big difference from what I was used to for Iraq and Afghanistan. Iraq and Afghanistan, I got to spend time on rare occasion interacting with the locals. And usually it was directly within the workday, whether I was on a combat patrol and stopping to talk to some locals about what's going on, or I was doing a security mission where part of it, I'm going to be at a spot for 4 or 5 hours. And so I'm just going to talk to the Iraqis that are hanging out in the room with me, security personnel, stuff like that. But in Ukraine, I spent a decent amount in Kyiv. My unit was based in Kyiv, and then we would call it a deployment, but we would go to the front lines for not necessarily a specific amount of time like it is in the US military, but we would try to go there for maybe 3 to 6 months at a time, and then come back and then spend maybe a month of vacation time where you can do whatever you want. You can leave the country if you want to, or whatever. And then hopefully try to find some new recruits to replace whoever was leaving, whether people were leaving because they were killed, injured, or it was just that they were done. And then we would do some training all together with whoever we had, and then go back out to the front lines. So during a lot of those times, I spent a significant amount of time in Kyiv. I got to spend time in like city centers of Mykolaiv, Zaporizhia, Kharkiv, some of the smaller areas in Donetsk also. and some time in like Dnipro, and we did training in different parts of the country. So for that, I got to interact with civilians quite a bit, and it helped me better understand the culture, which helped me better understand the front lines more, and understanding that just some of the differences between the Ukrainian culture, which includes a post-Soviet aspect to it, and the differences of the American culture, and that some of those differences are not compatible. We can do very well with them if we just understand that there's differences there, and we just need to find some kind of way to work amongst those differences.
You know, we see that too in the Ukrainian community here, where we have the immigrants that came and built the Ukrainian community infrastructure, the churches, the cultural centers, the dance groups, and all that stuff. My parents' generation, very much American and Ukrainians living in America. And we see now with the Ukrainians coming now, refugees from war, there is, even within Ukrainians who grew up here and have lived here versus Ukrainians who come from Ukraine, there is definitely a cultural difference. So I think I can appreciate what you're talking about.
Absolutely. And I know that overall, the majority of my interactions with Ukrainians in Ukraine and in the US have been overall good. I've had significant amounts of very interesting negative interactions as well, both in Ukraine and in the United States. In the US, from refugees that have been here, recently over the last 3 years, and folks that have been here, maybe for the last 10, 15 years, something like that. So that's been really interesting to interact with. The positive ones were usually based off of just the question of why, and just an absence of understanding why would someone leave the United States, which is perceived to be a fantastic country, to come to a place like Ukraine that a lot of people have never heard of internationally, to fight the Russian army, which especially at the beginning was still kind of considered to be a formidable force, and they are in their own right. But when this all started, they were the second strongest military in the world, and now we realize that they're nothing close to that. But tanks still kill people, and artillery still sucks sometimes, and so they can still do a decent amount of damage. But
that's
even
a
in
fair
Ukraine,
question. That's a fair question. Why would some? I mean, and I mean, all the answers I can think of are very lofty and very humbling to us. And it truly is a definition of heroism. I mean, I don't even know what to say there. But I understand why people would ask you that.
Yeah, and I think for that, it's just circumstantial cultural differences at a foundational level. I believe ever since one of our first presidents, I think since Jefferson, we've had an international naval presence in like the Mediterranean. So, even going back into the 1700s and early 1800s, the United States has actively gone to other places to see what's going on. So we did have our Civil War in the 1860s, but other than that, after we got our full, what we know to be our 50 continental states now, we haven't had any warfare really on our country. We've had some terrorist stuff, but all the warfare stuff that we've done is us getting onto a plane and going somewhere, or World War II was getting on a boat and going somewhere to fight somewhere else to preserve our freedom, while also helping preserve the freedom of whatever countries needed our assistance. Whereas Ukraine really just hasn't had that. It's just a different circumstance. It's not a negative thing. It's just a different circumstance, that Ukraine's never been a country that sends folks to a different continent or a different hemisphere to go and do combat operations to help out someone. It's just not something that Ukraine does. So for that, I think it's really just a cultural difference. For us, it's just normal that you get on a boat or you get on a plane to go and help out someone.
That's funny. And I'm gonna yield the mic in just a second. I imagine poor Victor is. Well, I spent some summers working in Ukraine in the 1990s when I was a grad student, and this was very shortly after the dissolution of the Soviet Union, and I remember it was such a it's kind of a long story. So the short version is this: the people I was with, Americans like me, were very quick to go help a situation that was not hard at all to help. The Ukrainians at the time were shocked. Like, why would you do that? You don't even know them. What are you doing? And then one of the people there actually had visited America and said, "No, that's what they're like. That's Americans." And it was such a proud moment for me, that is what Americans are like. And I love that. And I'm so grateful to you. I want to end just by saying, you said you speak English and freedom. Like, thank you. Thank you so much. Victor, I'm going to turn it back to you. Thank you so much, Sergeant Sampson. We're so blessed to be able to talk to you. Thank you for everything you have done and everything that represents in the heart with which you've done it.
Absolutely, I'm happy to do so. And also, just so it's known, one way to follow me is if you Google me, Matthew Sampson Ukraine, on the entire Google page, and I have been for quite some time. The very first thing that pops up is my website, and on my website is all my contact information, along with some information about me. And I try to keep that updated as best as possible. I have fundraisers that run on there, but most importantly, my contact information is on there, and I'm always eager to share my experience, my stories, and just share what I've seen as an American warfighter over there, whether people agree with it or not, whatever, but just to share what I've seen, so that way folks can be more informed about whatever opinions they're going to conclude about the whole situation.
I'm going to put that in the chat right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Katerina. Thank you for your profound questions. And again, of course, to Sergeant Sampson for his heroism and willingness to talk to us. He is definitely one of the best spokesmen we have heard over this more than 3 years. Anara, please.
Thank you very much for your rare expertise and your actually suggestions, and what your vision is extremely important, especially for young people, especially because you were there. And my question is, how can the U.S. help Ukraine in general? Because you see this, the discussions, and how they can help their foreign legion. And another question, what kind of trainings, military or maybe not military, should be provided for women and for men in Ukraine? What are your thoughts about this? Thank you.
So I'll start by answering the question for military training. I think that is something that could have a massive positive effect for Ukraine, and especially in their military, and that it would overflow into their government and into their civilian sectors. And I'll use the Marine Corps as an example. That I am biased for the U.S. military branches of being a Marine, but I spent 3 months in boot camp just transitioning from being a civilian to a Marine, and then I spend for my job being infantry, that's approximately 2 more months of just learning how to be a rifleman, just basic combat stuff. So that's about 5 months of training. And then I go to my combat unit, and there's always some amount of training that you do with your combat unit in the US before you ever see combat. So there's a real possibility. So that's a minimum of approximately 6 months there, just minimum, before you're even eligible legally to really just go and fight for anything infantry related. The reality is even during the time of war, with a lot of stuff going on with Iraq and Afghanistan back, like 15 years ago or so, you could easily spend a year from your first day joining the military until your first day of combat. And a lot of that's going to be training, and it's good quality training with very strict standards. For the Marine Corps, everything matters. Every little detail matters. The way we lace our boots matters. Everyone will lace their boots the exact same way all the time. There are zero exceptions for that. And that's to reinforce that we are all working as a unit. There are no individuals there. As much as, yes, I am Marine Sampson, we are there to work as a team, so that way we can succeed as a team. Because your choices on the battlefield, from my perspective, is you either succeed as a team or you die as a bunch of individuals. So when I compare that to what I've seen in other countries, in places like Ukraine, for example, that level of attention to detail does not exist. The level of training of months and months and months of training does not exist. For us, I think we spent maybe 2 weeks just going over Marine Corps history. And that's something that I know is not happening in. I've never heard of that happening in other militaries around the world. So I'm not sure if other militaries do that. I've never heard of it. But even in boot camp, I was shocked that we spent so much time in a classroom where we had to take tests. You have to get the answers correct. I had to know all this stuff about the Marine Corps before I could start playing with a weapon or anything like that and do the stuff that you would see on TV or in movies or something like that. So having all of that, in the moment I didn't understand why we were doing it. It seemed really stupid. We spent a full week pretending to shoot our guns, where you pull the trigger with no ammo. We did that for a week just to learn how to pull the trigger properly. And then after doing that for a week, then you get ammo for the first time. And you've already mastered how to pull the trigger properly. So that way you can actually hit your target and not just waste a bunch of ammo. So in the moment, it seemed really stupid, insanely stupid, even though we were at war in Iraq and Afghanistan at the time. When I go to places like Ukraine, I understand it very clearly of how important it is to pretend to shoot a weapon for a week before you get ammunition, because I see what happens out there on both sides. And so it helps me understand that the training matters significantly. So there are times that the training is absent of the Western aid that's coming to Ukraine from all nations. So I'm not saying that it's never happening, but there has been a massive breakdown in that, where I've seen Ukrainian units get some really cool American weapons still with the packing grease on them, like they're brand new out of the box. No one trained them how to use them. There was just an assumption that they know how to use them, and from my perspective, the culture doesn't want to be embarrassed. So it's really challenging to find someone within the culture, post-Soviet culture, especially if they're older and grew up in the Soviet Union, that's willing to say, I don't know how to use this. Will you please teach me? That's really doesn't exist. And if I just ask them, do you know how to use this? Most of the time, they're going to say, yes, of course, go away, because they just don't want to be embarrassed. Whereas for us, we go about that stuff a little bit differently, because we understand the value of life, I think, a little bit differently than in the Soviet or post-Soviet world, where we do a lot to make sure that all of us come home alive. So if that means that we got to spend 5 more minutes training or 5 more weeks training, we do that to make sure that we maximize our capabilities of people coming home alive. So that's something that is a difference there. And that even reminds me of one of my negative interactions there, where interacted with a Ukrainian doctor. Now, I don't know where he was I don't know if he was born in Ukraine, but he was at a Ukrainian hospital, an older gentleman. So obviously grew up in the Soviet Union, and he refused to treat one of my men. He was a French man that was attacked by a Ukrainian dog, and he just needed a rabies vaccine, nothing, crazy. And we had to threaten this doctor before he was actually willing to start telling us the truth and actually treat us. And part of the problem was an American was in the room, and America is the enemy of the Soviet Union. And France is not necessarily a friend of the Soviet Union either. So it was one of those that, even though the country's at war, there were so many that were so short-sighted that they just wanted to see anyone but Russia to be the enemy. And I've encountered that a lot here in the United States as well. And so to answer part of your other question, one thing that the US can do to help places like Ukraine, and we're not doing a very good job of it, is showing that it's okay to disagree about some stuff, especially if it's big political issues. That's something that's been very, very active in the last couple of years. Is the political stuff can make and break relationships, which from my perspective is ridiculous. That's something that we're struggling with here, and I believe that's because the Kremlin is really good at what they do, and the Kremlin has been sowing that separation in the American culture for decades, and they're just good at that stuff. But I've had Ukrainians look me in the eye and tell me, you should go kill yourself, because they find out that I'm a registered Republican. And even though I did a bunch of stuff for their country, they're telling me that I should go kill myself, because in their eyes, the Republican Party should not exist. Republicans should not exist. And I've had some Ukrainian refugees even tell me to my face that, there should be camps, and people like me should be rounded up and eliminated in those camps.
Wow.
Which is the same thing that I think we heard from Hitler during the Reich, and the world later agreed that that's not the way things should work. So it's interesting to see just the cultural differences there, that there's so much animosity, and sometimes, you know, the Kremlin is just fantastic at their propaganda and disinformation. They're bad at almost everything else that they do or attempt to do, but the propaganda and disinformation they're fantastic at, and they're dumping massive resources into that. So that's something that I'm trying to do as much I can to continually to share the perspective of it's okay to disagree about stuff. You know, we it shouldn't be Americans against Americans or Ukrainians against Americans. It should be how can we work together to see Russia as the actual enemy, not the American that voted for the other person or the Ukrainian that wished they could have voted for the other person or whatever the case is.
That's a very interesting recommendation and observation. I like it. And I lived myself when I was actually in early 90s. I lived in a military town. In military town in Saratov, actually in Russia. And I saw both Russian and Ukrainians. They are both ethnic groups dominated clearly. And they were the most actually professionally prepared people compared to the rest. So that's why they really cooperated nicely with each other. So that's why I just imagine that's a very strange situation, that they still have their military background, military stereotypes, and they should fight against each other. That's actually what usually we do not talk about, but because I lived there and I saw how military totally different compared what we can read or can listen to or watch. That's a very valuable observation. Thank you.
Absolutely. And it's something that I understand that the United States has a lot of problems. Our political system has a lot of problems, but from the countries I've been to and what I've seen out there, I think our system is really the best in the world. And I find that there is a massive positive effect that we are grateful for and that we are receiving of having two massive political parties that are most of the time in opposition to each other, and no one's shooting at each other in the White House or in Congress. They're yelling at each other, which I think is fantastic. That our culture is we could disagree about something. Even the aid package of the $60 billion that was argued about for like 6 months in Congress. For me, out at the front lines, I wish it would have been passed on day one because we needed the support. Me as an American, though, I was really proud that it's something that could be argued about, and some people hate it, some people love it for 6 months, and at no point are there bombs going off or anything like that of that kind of violence. So the fact that we do that shows me that it's better than everything else out there, because that's what makes the best decisions in my perspective. You have two opposing sides that disagree with each other, and they're forced to work together to find some whatever the third option is from time to time of what works, compared to some of the other cultures, whether it was Nazi Germany, Imperial Japan, the Soviet Union, where if you disagreed, you were not allowed to be alive. And that's where I understand when I have Ukrainians that look me in the eye, whether they're in the United States or not, that will tell me that my political party should not exist and people like myself should not exist. I've had some Ukrainian refugees that are here with their children, enjoying the safety that I provided to them as being U.S. military, and everyone else that's ever worn a uniform in the United States, both law enforcement and the military, that will tell me that there's only one political party in the United States that should ever exist. And it's interesting to see that if that's what you want to have, then you should probably move to a place like Russia because that's kind of what they have there. So having that makes me very grateful that my country offers that to citizens from around the world and to ourselves, that we can have that. And that's where I see it's those people, even though I'm not super excited when someone tells me I should I'm not allowed to be alive. I appreciate that they are fully expressing their freedoms that myself and many others have fought and died for. That if I know sometimes Ukrainians disappear. If a Ukrainian says the wrong thing about the Ukrainian government, sometimes they disappear. It doesn't happen. It happens much, much more in Russia. It happens in places like Iraq and Afghanistan as well. That, if someone were to say that to a Russian soldier in Russia, there's a good chance that they would be killed on the spot and no one would care. Whereas in my country, as long as they don't touch me with violence, then they're fully protected by everything that our country stands for. That they can say horrible things to me, and that's really cool. I find that fantastic, and I appreciate that. Even if they don't appreciate it, that they get to enjoy that freedom because of what myself and others before and after me have sacrificed.
Great conversation. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Anara and Katerina, for your wonderful insights and questions. We're nearing the end of the hour. Of course, I would have many questions of my own and comments, but maybe some of our live viewers have something to say right now as they think about it. I wanted, of course, to ask something that everyone thinks about, but are probably not asking. How long? What do you think?
Overall, I think the short answer is I'm not quite sure. My short answer to that is I think there's a bigger picture thing that's happening here. I think that there's a lot of parallels of what was going on that ultimately led to the Soviet Union falling apart, and that was done with, unfortunately, a lot of deaths of people in between. So it's unfortunate for the people that are in Ukraine that are suffering through everything that's happening there. And for me, just being an American and a human, it's unfortunate also for all the Russians that have died and been injured in this whole process. Not all the Russians out there that are fighting are shitty people. Some of them do shitty things, but just looking at as just humans and just basic respect for human life. I feel compassion for everyone that's being negatively affected by what's going on both sides of the line. So, but I do see a lot of parallels of what was experienced during the Cold War. And from my understanding, a lot of the Cold War was really focused on how to force the Soviet Union to collapse without going directly to war with them. And it just took a really long time to get to that point, and it ended up working. The space race, I think, was part of that. We could spend a lot more money than they can, and they are short-sighted enough that they'll try to spend the same amount of money, and they'll just spend too much and ultimately fall apart. We see some of that going on in Russia right now, where the sanctions are devastating the Russian economy. A huge amount of the Russian economy is 100% based off of their military spending. So there's aspects of that I think that they feel like they can't stop the war, even if they wanted to, because their economy would collapse and the whole Russian Federation could collapse. We get reports more and more often that as the Russian casualties mount and the number gets bigger and bigger, which recently I think passed a million casualties of killed and wounded and missing in action, that's a lot of people in the short amount of time that we've been fighting out there. For it not to be an official world war, that's a lot of people to be dead or wounded on just the Russian side, not to include the foreigners and the Ukrainians, and all those affected around the world by exports being negatively affected, stuff that Ukraine would normally export to help feed other parts of the world, stuff like that. So we know there's been more and more reports of parts of Russia that are discussing declaring independence, just like what led to the early 90s. More and more parts of the Soviet Union and that we're talking about all declaring independence, all around the same time. And we saw that in 1991.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your thoughts. And of course, there's so much unknown at this moment, and the policies change by the day. We can only expect that the wind will change our way. We know that another change in policy may be coming in US next week. We're watching. We will be very glad to have you again, Matthew, on our program. Maybe it would be logical to interview you after your summit advocacy in fall. So you are very eloquently telling us about your experience with the U.S. lawmakers. I understand that you are making it now one of your priorities.
Yes, that is correct.
One more question from me, as anyone is thinking, maybe. You are, as I said, you are talking to lawmakers and to people. You are going around the country as you came to West Virginia last month. What is your dynamics? What is schedule? Are you intending to do it for some time now? What is your schedule?
It's my overall priority to do as much as I can to educate the voters and the lawmakers. Last year, I was in the United States for 6 months, and I drove over 20,000 miles
Wow.
in the United States during those 6 months, along with a couple domestic flights as well. But driving over 20,000 miles, 80% of that was advocacy work, and about 20% of that was personal stuff. I had to deal with my mother had just died, and that caused a bunch of stuff that I had to deal with, and spend some time with my sister and some other things. So that's what I try to do, to just share my experience, and especially with the division that I see, especially left versus right, conservative versus liberal, and the amount of hatred that's there. Because like for myself, as a warfighter, I think I've experienced more hatred here in the United States from folks within the pro-Ukrainian community, whether they're Ukrainian refugees or Ukrainian Americans, whatever the case. I've experienced more hate there than I have from Russians at the front lines, of just that passionate hate of out at the front lines. I look at it as, yeah, there's some evil that happens out there, but at the same time, there's an aspect of it that's business. That their job, they're following orders. Their job is to fight for their country, and that they're following orders. And if they decide to not follow orders, they're going to get killed by their own people. The Ukrainian side is fighting for every inch of their own personal land, and a lot of them also don't have the option to turn around and retreat or something like that. So it's a little bit different out there. But my main thing is really just trying to reinforce that it's okay for us to disagree. At no point should it ever be Americans fighting Americans, whether that's verbally or physically. And any moment that happens, whether it's within the pro-Ukrainian community or elsewhere, then Russia is winning in that moment. And any time that an individual sees Russia as not the number one problem, but sees the liberal or the conservative as the number one problem, then unfortunately, in that moment, Russia is winning. And that is our battlefield to fight here in the United States.
Very well said, and a great phrase to carry with you as we conclude this session. Thank you very much. Once again, Sergeant Matthew Sampson was with us with MUkraine weekly meeting number 176, July 11th, 2025. I will ask Dr. Shrey to conclude with Ukrainian greeting, as we usually do, to our viewers. Thank you for everyone who was watching live or will watch in the recording.
Дорогі браття і сестри в Україні, ми зберігаємо вас у наших щоденних думках і молитвах. Нехай милосердний Бог тримає вас у своїй опіці. До наступного тижня. Прощаємося.
Слава Україні!
Героям слава!
Thank you.